So I'm glad you're here today. I'm Annmarie Kelly, and I'm the author of Victorious Woman and Victory by Design and 5-Year Marriage. And I'm really glad that you're here today because I've been doing this for a long time. And I've watched so many women go from confused or not sure what they want or just wanting something more and not sure what that is. And I've watched them empower themselves to go after what it is that they want and using the simple system that I'm going to show you today. And congratulations to you for doing that and being here. If you take what I'm showing you today and implement it into your life, you're going to see amazing changes because I've watched women over the years make amazing changes. Here's the problem. It's that whole not enough thing. Do you know what I mean? It's I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not rich enough, whatever it is, I'm not enough. But when you drill down a little bit and ask and think about it, and when I ask women, well, not enough of what? Nobody's really quite sure what they're not enough of. They just have this like nagging feeling that they're not enough. Then it becomes really hard because you keep chasing around after the something that somebody's telling you that you need. So you can have more, but more of what? And that's the thing that people aren't so clear about. When you're looking for more and you're not really clear about it, it's kind of like, like wishing on a star. It's like, I wish I may, I wish I might, but you don't even know what that wish is. And if you're not really clear for yourself, how are you going to make it happen? What I'm asking you to do, and I'll be showing you, is a system for you to have the more that really makes a difference. And it's a system of thoughts and decisions and plans and actions. And I'll share that system with you in just a couple of minutes. So there's that thought of that system. And in order to work the system, and the system, I have to tell you, the system always works. If you work it, the system always works. But there's a price to be paid, just the way there's a price for everything. And actually, it's more like an exchange. So when you think about, what am I going to exchange to get this? Like when you go to the store and you want to buy something, you exchange money for this thing that you want. Well, it's the same thing with your Savvy Sizzle. What do you need to exchange to get your Savvy Sizzle back? Well, it's time. Can you put in the time? Are you willing to make the effort? And do you have the courage? And that's always very interesting because I think it's really easy to stay in your comfort zone. If you can watch TV all day or go out and play or do other things that you know are important, and it's easier to stay inside and do something meaningless, and it's more comfortable, you're more likely to do it. I really think about your comfort zone is so strong that some people would rather die than leave their comfort zones. And I think sometimes people do. There was a woman several years ago, if she would go and give her mother Reiki. Her mother had been diagnosed with cancer and didn't want to take any treatment. And I talk about her in my book, Victorious Woman. And the thing with her was, when I went over and I saw her for every Saturday for several months, and we would talk about what she would do if she decided on the treatment and got well. We talked about that every Saturday for months. I think I started seeing her in September and I saw her until the end of November. And here is the thing. In the book, I call her Annie. So I'll use that name here, though not her real name. Annie wanted to open up a bridal salon. It was her big dream, and she made bridal gowns. Her gowns, she was working on one when I was working on her with Reiki, and her gown was beautiful. She was doing it for her niece. She really wanted to open up a bridal salon. The problem was that when she told her kids, they were like, "Oh, Mom, you worked so hard raising us. Now's your time to just have fun." Her spouse wouldn't even discuss it, would not have a conversation. He didn't even like me being there. Like I used to go on Saturday morning because that's when he played golf. And I stopped because it got too cold for him to play golf. So there was no support from her spouse, no support from her kids. When she told her girlfriends, they said, "Oh, Annie, you're just having a midlife crisis. You'll get over it." But that was the thing. It didn't really matter. And she was financially okay, that if it didn't end up being really successful, it was not a problem, but it was what would have filled her up. It was it's the thing that would have made her so happy. She got no support and she ended up choosing to continuing to not have treatment. And I saw her up until the day before she died. And I went to the funeral and and I probably had a conversation with her that was more real than she had with anybody else. So when I went to the funeral and she was so well liked, church was packed. It was standing room only. And I thought to myself, here are all the people for whom she didn't want to change. She couldn't leave her comfort zone because she was so afraid that they wouldn't like her anymore or that they wouldn't support her. And I thought, these are the people who loved her to death because she just felt if she couldn't do this thing that would have filled her up, there was no point to stay. So you really need to think about that when you're thinking about your comfort zone. And there's an old adage: if you always do what you've always done, you're always going to get what you already got. So if what you have now isn't what you really want, then the exchange is the time that you need to put in, the effort that you're going to make, and the courage to do it. When I talk about the courage, what I'm really talking about is how do you victory? And victory, as I always define it, is that stretch you make out of your comfort zone to get from where you are to where you want to be. So when you're thinking about the courage, think about that whole victory idea. You're stretching yourself out of your comfort zone. So there's a 3-part system. You have to know what you want to do, you have to know how to do it, and then you have to do it. That's such a simple system. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. Here's the thing. Let's start with knowing what to do. But when I do this, like in the Savvy Sizzle workshop, I ask everybody to think about what it is specifically that they want. So sometimes people will say, well, I want to meet a nice guy. You know what? I don't even know what that means, a nice guy. You meet nice guys all the time, probably. But is it that you want to meet a nice man that you can have a relationship with? And when you talk about nice, what does that mean? Does nice mean that he's gentle? Does it mean that he's got money? Does it mean that he is respectful? Does it mean that he has kids? There's a whole bunch of things that nice could be. So if you want to know what to do and you just say nice, you're not going to get any place with that. That whole knowing what to do. Or what if you say, I want to have enough money to retire? I don't even know what that means. Unless you actually put a number on it and say, my IRA has to hit $1 million before I can retire. Or I need to make this much money per month to continue the lifestyle I have now in retirement. If you give it a specific number, then you know what it is. Then you can start planning, which is the knowing how to do it. The tip that I use for knowing how to do it is this. You take the whole process of I'm here and I want to get to here. And you break that into 3 sections, sort of subsets of the big picture. And then you look at each one of those little sections and you break it down to the very littlest piece. You might know that I didn't get my college degree until 2001, which was a little bit of time after I graduated high school. Okay, more than a little bit of time. When I did this process with getting my degree, I decided it's time. I have to go back and get my degree because it was meaningful to me to do it. So I figured out that whole plan and I broke it into subsets. When I broke it down to the littlest first step was finding someplace that could fit my program that would fit my lifestyle. So that was relatively easy because I just had to go to different schools and everybody had a program for non-traditional students, as they were called then. The next step after was to decide on one, and I did. I chose Newman University. And the next step was to make a phone call. Those were all tiny little steps. Every single step took me one step closer, but they were so tiny, all those steps, that they were tiny little steps didn't necessarily make them really easy. But the day I made the phone call to actually make that commitment, I was on the phone for probably 10 or 15 minutes. I cried almost the whole conversation. I was on the phone all the time, and yet this was so monumental that I just couldn't make that step without expressing myself that way. But I did it. It was a tiny step. It was just a phone call. The phone call led to the next step, and the next step, and finally I graduated magna cum laude in 2001, which I was so proud about. You have to figure out what you want to do and then bring it down to the tiniest step, because you can do the tiny steps. If you make a big leap, they're hard. Tiny steps make a difference. So then the next piece is that you have to talk about doing it. Now, in the doing it part, that's always interesting because there are three things that motivate people to take action. Because again, you can make the plan, with this knowing what to do and how to do it and doing it, 2 out of 3 doesn't cut it. You have to do all 3 pieces. You can know what you want to do, you can know how to do it, and then you can watch television all day and it's never going to change. Or you can know how to be willing to do something and take an action, but not be really clear about what you want. And then you're just going to be spinning your wheels. And what I run into a lot of times, especially with younger people, is they know what they want and they're willing to do it, but they don't have any clue how to make it happen. You have to do all 3 pieces. So we talked about knowing what to do, and we talked about how to do it. The doing it is so interesting because you have to find your motivation. So what motivates you? Well, there's 3 things that you can think about that can be motivations. The first one is a change. First thing that you might want to think about is what's changed around me, or who has changed around me. Like this is like an interesting scenario, and I remember this happened to somebody that she wanted to, somebody in a class, she wanted to get a new job, but she was like dilly-dallying and dilly-dallying and dilly-dallying. And she came to the class to talk about that and maybe get some support in doing it. And she was making some progress, but then something happened at work. Her coworker, who she felt was totally unqualified, got promoted. And now that coworker was her boss. And she had a lot of reasons why she thinks that person got promoted, but it didn't matter. She got promoted and was her boss. Boy, you want to talk about getting a fire lit under you? She was like, oh my God, like you could just imagine the scenarios, the things that she might have said. But that was the thing. It was a change in where she was. Sometimes it's a change in people, or I used to live in a lovely neighborhood. They were row houses. We now call them townhouses, but in suburban Philadelphia, were row houses. And when I moved in, it was a lot of people who had lived there from the 1940s and 50s, and they were older, and it was charming. I lived there for 11 years. And around the year 9 or 10, things started to shift, and the neighborhood started to get rough. And I guess the easiest way to say it is that people weren't as friendly as they were in the past. And that's when I made the decision that I would have to move, because I didn't think that was going to get better. And I was concerned about the equity in my home. But it was a change around me that happened. So that's one thing that motivates you. The second thing is an epiphany. And I want to tell you this, that when I was 22, I was engaged. And I was doing the pre-program, and some of you will recognize the Good Girl pre-program. You're raised to think that you go to school and then you get out of school and you get a good job, and then you find somebody to get married to, and then you have kids and you buy a house. You have more kids, you buy a bigger house, and that takes you up to around the time you're 40 or 50. That was the pre-program. And I grew up in an old school Italian family. So it was even that was even way stronger, because as I often say, in my family, my Italian family, you didn't leave the house unless you were in a wedding gown or a nun's habit or a coffin. So if you were anything else, you were just going to be a puttana, which for some of you who don't know, that means being a slut. So that was the mindset that I was raised in. And I was on track. I was engaged to a guy. Everything was moving forward. We had bought silverware. We were waiting to get china. And I picked out a china pattern that I really wanted. And then something happened, and I thought, this isn't going to work out for me. And how in my good girl thought process, I thought that I don't really know. That was like the grace of God. But I did. And after my fiance and I broke up, so we went out one day and I broke the engagement. My father was furious. And I thought it took me a little bit of time, but he could not get past his stupid Italian pre-programming to know what was best for me. And I realized that if my father, who I know loved me, could not get past that stupid Italian programming, whatever that pre-program was for him, to know what was best for me, there was never going to be another person in my whole life who was ever going to know what was good for me but me. That was an epiphany. And it was a big shock to me. As there I was in my early 20s. But it shifted everything in my life because I no longer thought somebody knew more than I did for me. Lots of people knew more stuff than I did, but what was right for me was right for me. And while I made a lot of mistakes, I always made the decisions that were right for me. So change, an epiphany, and here's the other one. It's a significant emotional experience. In my book, Victorious Woman, I talk about a woman, her name is Lily. And what she said to me was, when we were doing the interview, was that on one particular night, she was in an abusive marriage, and it was long and lengthy, and it was, I detail it in the book. But one of the things that happened, her significant emotional experience, was that one night he came home and he had been drinking, and they lived in an apartment, and they had 2 kids. And something happened between them, and she ran out of the house and she started running down a major highway. For those of you who know this area, Route 202 in Delaware. She was running down the highway in the middle of the night. It was a big highway, and it was dark. And she got out of that okay, but she had been dilly-dallying about leaving him. It was, everything that people think, like she didn't have a skill, she couldn't make any money, but that was a significant emotional experience. And the very next day, when he left the house, she went to a shelter, and I don't think she started with the shelter. She started with getting help. That eventually led to her going into the shelter. But that significant emotional experience shifted something inside of her. So when I talk about doing it, if you're thinking about, I want this, and you're not sure if you have the time and effort and willing to make the effort to have the courage, look to what really motivates you. Is there something that's changed? Did you have an epiphany at some point? Or was there some significant emotional experience? For a lot of people, the pandemic was a significant emotional experience. Very often it's the death of a loved one that's your significant emotional experience. So that's something to consider. When I do the Savvy Sizzle workshop, I talk about the doing. We spend a whole week on knowing what to do. And actually we spend 2 weeks because in the workshop we talk about it. People start thinking about what that is. We have conversations about it. You have homework, and then you come back the next week and we talk about it a little more. But also, very often people aren't very clear about what it is that they want to do. So I came up with these 5 questions, and hopefully you downloaded the handout. The first one is, what is happiness to you? Now, it almost seems counterintuitive to say, well, what is happiness? But I'm always amazed at how few people know what happiness is for them. We can look at magazines and look online and watch TV and see people being happy. But very often, it's part of that FOMO thing. We're chasing the happiness that is somebody else's idea of happiness. Maybe it's the bigger house or the new job, or and that isn't making you happy, but you think you have to go after it. When we do this exercise, and when people really drill down and say what really makes them happy, it's really a surprise to many people that they really are already happy. They just didn't realize that they had the things that actually make them happy. And very often, I think what happens is that we that we focus on the things we don't have instead of the things that we do have. But when you're focused on what makes you happy, then you can stay more focused on that. For example, there was a woman who came, one of the things that made her happy was that her children were strong and self-sufficient and could stand on their own 2 feet. She considered that her biggest job was raising her kids, and that makes her happy. Somebody leaving an abusive relationship, that would make them happy. Having a house by the ocean, that would certainly make me happy. So you need to really think about what is happiness to you. And when you're thinking about that, when you come to knowing what to do, you want to make sure that the end result is going to give you the happiness that you're looking for. It's the same thing with success. What is success? Success is so deeply personal to people. You know, for some people, just being able to have children is a success. There's one woman whose goal was to take her business from a local to a national enterprise. That to her would have been success. What other people tell you is success isn't necessarily what it is to you. So to drill down and say, what makes me feel successful? And I want you to know that happiness and success, they become, as I said, like your North Star. They always lead you in the right direction. It might not always make the people around you feel happy or successful, but that's their business. Your business is what makes you happy and makes you feel successful. What fills you up? It's so interesting to me when we think about what fills us up because, and you know, I'm not talking about food or drink. I'm talking about the stuff that fill you up emotionally. It's interesting what people have said over time that fill them up. But if you think about getting filled up, think about when you put gas in your car. When you have a full tank, you can go every place. If you're down below a quarter of a tank, that's a little bit of a problem. And you better know where your nearest gas station is, especially if you're on the road. When you talk about getting emotionally filled up, what are the things that make you feel like you have a full tank? It's important for your energy, but there are things in life that are going to be drains, and it's like turning on a spigot in the bottom of your gas tank and all that gas goes out. They're going to drain you. When you know what fills you up, then you know how to you can go back to that list and say, I can do this. Maybe it's reading a book. Maybe it's going dancing. Maybe it's meditation or massage. There's a whole bunch of things that can fill you up and keep the engine going. So it's like when you're down below a half a tank, you know and you need to know where the gas station is. When your energy gets down below a half a tank and you have this list, you know where to go to fill yourself up. In the 5 questions, what makes you feel special? The very first time I did this was at the bequest of a coach that I was working with. And she said, I want you to go and I want you to find the things that make you feel special. It never occurred to me before then that I didn't even know what made me feel special. I knew when I felt special, but to be able to actually define what makes me feel special, what was a good exercise. And when you know the things that make you feel special, you can incorporate them more and more into your life. When you feel special, how does that make you feel? Empowered, confident, happy. And sometimes it could be something really silly, something small. Doesn't matter. Whatever it is, if you can incorporate that more and more into your life, that becomes really important for you. And not more importantly, but just as important, I would say, that if you know what makes you feel special and you have a list, you can share that with your loved ones so they too know what makes you feel special and they too can start incorporating some of those things into your life together. If you can have 3 things that make you feel special or 10 things, the more things you have on that list, same thing with what fills you up, the more things that are on that list, the easier it is for you to make yourself happy and satisfied and filled up and fulfilled. But it also helps other people to know what to do for you. And the last of the 5 questions is, when you're feeling your power, what are you doing? I don't know if you've ever seen the Amy Cuddy TED Talk, but she does a whole thing about the science of body language. And if you've never seen it, Amy Cuddy is her name, and it's worth a watch. But she talks about how when you're in your power, you're more open. And she does a demonstration where your shoulders are back, your arms are down and not behind you, but by your side. Whereas compared that with when you're not feeling in your power and you're crunched over and maybe you're folding your hands below to your waist. There are power stances. And when you're feeling in your power, how are you standing? How are you moving? What are you thinking when you're in your power? When you've done something fabulous and you know you did it and you did it on your own, what goes through your head? What are you telling yourself? Knowing those things help you to think about those and duplicate them. And that's hugely powerful for you. So if you haven't already done your 5 questions, I really recommend that you do those 5 questions. I will tell you that your idea of success could change. Revisit it every once in a while, just to make sure you're still on track. But those 2 things are your North Star. The other things, what fills you up, what makes you feel special, how do you feel when you're in your power, add to those as often as you can. Before I want to go back to, we talked about knowing how to do something, that you make a plan and that you start from the end and work backwards, break it into a couple of sections. The one thing I like about the Savvy Sizzle workshop is when we do it, you make your plan and then you share it with the group. And very often what happens is you've missed stuff or you didn't realize something that would have been important. And getting that feedback from other members can save you a ton of time and energy. Because if you miss one piece, you're like, oh, I never thought of that. I'm so glad that you noticed that. It becomes very important in how to do it. So that's the process. You have to know what you want to do, you have to know how to do it, and then you have to do it. In the Savvy Sizzle workshop, that's what we go through. We do 5 weeks. And let me tell you how you can get that with me, personal coaching. We're one-on-one for 90 days. You get me on your team. You have access to me every day, except for Sundays. And the cost for that is $6,700 for the 90 days, which is a pretty decent deal. The other is the Savvy Sizzle Masterclass. It's 5 weekly classes. I do them like this as a webinar, so you can watch it again. You can go back and look at it again. You have access to me via email, and we have a private Facebook page. So you can go onto the Facebook page and post your plan, for example, and then get feedback from other people. Or many times it happens that when knowing what to do, that you run that by somebody and they're like, I really don't get what you're saying. I don't think that's clear enough. And they help you get more clarity about the what or the how. And when it comes to the doing, then you say, oh, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And then you get the support from other members. So all of that, my normal price for that is $697 for the 5 weeks. And then there's a follow-up phone call about a month after the class ends. If you register, I give you a discount of $200. So it's $497 for the 5 weeks and the follow-up phone call. So that's what I've got for you today. If you have any questions, you can send me an email. If you want to register for the class, send me an email to Annmarie at annmariekelly.com. If you have questions, same, Annmarie at annmariekelly.com. Have a fabulous rest of your day.